Do you think that aliens would converge on similar conceptions of beauty that humans have created? This question was posed to me during my talk at Conjecture Institutes 2025 Rat
Yes,
Fest.
this might be an adjacent question, actually. I'm wondering, like, you can imagine civilizations across the universe would, like, converge on similar conceptions of physics, because there's objective knowledge there. I think that would happen with aesthetics and beauties as well. Like, surely disparate civilization would converge on similar things, or is it open-ended for some other reason?
So I think that we would. The answer seems like a very obvious no. People from different cultures don't converge on the same works of art. People from the same culture, even at different times, or at the same time, don't converge on the same works of art. So how can an alien with different biology, different culture, ever converge on the same beauty that humans have created? Well, actually, this is asking for the wrong thing at the wrong level of detail. Hello, my name is Zachary, and I'm interested in art appreciation. Sometimes you have to understand the nature of reality in order to understand the nature of art. So follow me if that's something that's interesting to you. So why is convergence the wrong thing to look for? Let's just look at some things that we can imagine here. If I imagine convergence in physics, then I do not imagine an alien would independently be writing famous scientific papers. Like, for example, Einstein's paper called On the Electrodynamics of Moving Bodies. I wouldn't expect an alien to be writing that verbatim in perfect German. I would not even expect an alien to be writing the formula E equals mc squared. What I do expect is that the knowledge embodied in that equation, that knowledge of special relativity, to be embodied by some other equation, and importantly, to be embodied in the technology of the aliens. Maybe some distant civilization will have greater knowledge of special relativity. Maybe we humans have greater knowledge of special relativity than they do. It's not really that important, but what matters is not that we converge on the same endpoint. What matters is that we overlap in scope. We're both of our knowledge cover the same ideas. And of course, even humans have not converged on some endpoint with special relativity. Einstein himself created special relativity and created general relativity, which is broader and covers a wider subject, covers a wider scope than special relativity. So this question of whether civilizations across the universe would converge on similar conceptions of beauty should not be seen as, will aliens converge on similar works of art? It should be more closer to, will alien art overlap in scope with human art? But you may ask, what does it even mean to overlap in scope with a work of art? Right? Surely this doesn't mean like vaguely talking about the same subject matter, right? Like if human art has art about the night sky and some alien art also has art about the night sky, is that enough to say that there is actual overlap? I mean, maybe, kind of, sort of, but that's not really what we want to look for. But in order to get into the details, we need to get a little bit more specific in what I generally mean by beauty. We have to understand what beauty is. Beauty is a pattern that causes its own replication and causes other transformations. Now, I won't leave you just with this simple one-line definition. I will give some more detail here. Beauty is not just like something that I know I like, or I just have a particular feeling or a particular emotional response. It's a little bit more than just that. It's more than just a personal preference. It's not even a judgment of a particular work of art. There's more things going on, though those can be included. What we care about are the patterns within a work of art that can be replicated into the mind and cause transformations. There's something in a work of art that you notice, and that thing that you notice can move you, right? So when I say there's something in a work of art, I mean there's a pattern. And when I say that you can notice it, I mean that it replicates into your mind. And when I say that it moves you, I mean that there's a specific transformation that happens in your psychology. What we care about are the patterns within a work of art that can be replicated into the mind and cause transformations. In this case, if the pattern were to be different, it would not cause the same transformation. And in some cases, if the pattern is different, it is not even noticeable, so it doesn't replicate into the mind. And if that happens, of course, you have a work of art that's boring because if the patterns in the work of art can't be noticed, it's boring. And I don't know a better word to say than that. You can have a work of art and understand which parts of it actually have this property where they can replicate into the mind and cause some psychological or any other type of transformation. And you will recognize that every other part of the work that does not have that property is changeable or doesn't really matter. Like you can do other things with it without changing any of the things that would happen in your psychology, or without even being noticed in many cases. So that means that part, the entirety of the work of art is really like an environment. And there are going to be lots of different things that are kind of helpful for the environment, but the parts that actually replicate into your mind, those are, I'm just going to call them replicators. That's the beautiful part. That's the beauty. So there's this distinction here where you have the replicators in the work of art, and then you have the environment for the replicators. The replicators can cause transformations. Sometimes they're transformations in perception or attention or your mental states. They could even go further into being transformations in your behavior in your regular life. Any work of art can contain beauty that has these replicable patterns that can cause transformations to you. So for an alien civilization to create art that overlaps in scope to human art, what we need is to have similar patterns in the alien art and the human art that replicate in similar environments and cause similar transformations. So you might still be wondering, what is an environment? I want to go into a little bit more detail of what an environment is for this context with beauty. Simply put, there are actually just two different types of environments. One would be the actual work of art itself, that is an environment for the beauty. And the second environment will be the mind. There are others. The beauty could be abstracted and just placed somewhere without it being in the mind and without it being in a work of art, but that's not really relevant to what we're talking about right now. So we don't need to go too much into that. So for example, a work of art being an environment, there are going to be some patterns in a work of art that are beautiful. So I'm going to look at the idea of what is called the hero's journey. This is a specific pattern that shows up in many different works of art. It shows up in Star Wars. It has been replicated in The Lord of the Rings. It's also in The Matrix. It's fairly common. If you know about it, you will see it in a lot of different places. This is a pattern that exists in many different environments. So the hero's journey, in like a truncated version of the hero's journey, is just a narrative structure. And it starts with the hero being at home in like a familiar area. They have a call to adventure and they refuse the call. And then they have some aid to help them with the adventure. And then they go past a threshold where they can't return home, and so on and so forth. It kind of continues from there. That is a particular narrative pattern. That is beauty. And then everything around that will be the environment from the perspective of that particular replicator. So that thing can replicate, that what I just said, that pattern, there's more to it, but that pattern can replicate into many different works of art. And there are going to be lots of different things around it that can be changed because those things around it are a part of the environment of it. And sometimes you're going to need specific things in the environment to allow it to replicate. So for example, you couldn't have the hero's journey in an instrumental music, right? Because instrumental music isn't a narrative medium. So you can't have the hero's journey appear there. You need the environment to be a narrative environment. You need it to have characters, and specifically a hero, to have the hero's journey. So in this case, it's necessary for there to be some constraints on the environment. There's some particularities that are necessary for the environment. So if we were to think that this hero's journey would appear in an alien civilization, some things would be necessary for that to happen. You would also need for the aliens to create similar mediums. You would also need for the aliens to make narratives. right? So the existence of similar mediums for humans and aliens is relevant. Sometimes you need to have similar senses for the humans and the aliens to create. Sometimes you need similar senses for the humans and the aliens, and sometimes you need similar cultural norms for the humans and the aliens. And if all of those things align, then you can have some overlap, but you need to have overlap in that background knowledge, in this case, for the beauty of the hero's journey to be replicated or to be independently created for in the aliens and the humans. The other environment is the mind. So for a pattern to replicate into the mind, it requires the presence of other knowledge in the mind. So the environment of the mind needs to have different knowledge in order for the hero's journey to be noticed by the person who is viewing the work of art. You even need to have specific sensory, you need to have a specific sensory apparatus to be able to replicate the things within the work of art. So if I'm reading something, I'm going to need to have eyes to see it. I'm going to have some sort of visual system going on in order to see the work of art, to be able to read it, if it's a movie or whatever. Or I might need to have ears to hear the auditory rendition of it, something like that. I'm going to have some sort of sensory input. And then I'm going to need to be able to distinguish between foreground and background of the visuals and in these different types of things. I need to know how to do that. I need to know how to view a work of art. I need to know how to watch a movie. I need to know how to identify a character and identify them as separate from other characters. These are basic things that need to happen in the mind for you to be able to replicate the patterns that you see in a work of art. To go even a little bit more simple, if we have something like a visual pattern, like the rule of thirds, this is a way of arranging visual elements in a visual elements in an image. You need to have eyes to see that, of course, but you also need to have the awareness of how to section off parts of an image. And going back to like the work of art, you need to have an image that's rectangular. You need to have a medium that consistently makes rectangular images as a part of the medium, right? Not all visual arts need to be in a rectangular medium. They could be in a circle, it could be unbounded, it could be on a curved surface, it could be in architecture. There are a lot of different ways to have visual mediums. So an alien would need to create a rectangular medium and then also have the mental knowledge, this is in the mental environment, to be able to section off parts of it into equal parts. So there needs to be some kind of awareness of geometry. Right, so that means that there is background knowledge that's necessary in the environment. And sometimes that background knowledge is going to be wide-reaching. This is another way of saying that the alien civilization and the human civilizations must both independently create similar cultural knowledge, or background knowledge, so that the beauty will properly replicate. And this is cool because if there is any replication across species into distant species, then that means that there is some underlying background knowledge that is very wide-reaching. So let's get into more of the specifics of when there can be overlap and when there cannot be overlap. So you might wonder, when specifically could there be overlap and when specifically could there not be overlap? This is what I want to look into, not if there actually will be, but when could there be? So there's some patterns in works of art which can replicate, but they depend on background knowledge that is arbitrary. And other times it depends on background knowledge which is necessary for any intelligent civilization to progress. I'm going to reiterate that and just say it a little bit more cleanly. Some knowledge is arbitrary. Some knowledge is narrow-reaching. Some knowledge only fits into a narrow range of contexts. It would never need to be created independently in any other contexts. And there's other knowledge that is necessary for any intelligent civilization to progress. This knowledge is wide-reaching and it fits into a wide range of contexts. And many independent civilizations would need to create that same knowledge. So when beauty depends on narrow-reaching knowledge, something like the knowledge in the DNA, then it would be limited to specific beings that have that specific DNA. And really, when beauty depends on any cultural or contextual knowledge, it is limited to that culture or that specific context. So DNA is just like a particular example of contextual knowledge, and it's particularly difficult to replicate. Let's say, for example, there will be a species that creates a work of art that depends on pheromones, right? And in that case, it will be very difficult for other species to appreciate that work of art that depends on pheromones because, of course, pheromones are quite arbitrary. You don't get pheromones that are necessary or work between different species. The pheromone of a cat, I don't know if cats have pheromones, but you get what I'm saying. The pheromones of a cat do not affect dogs in any way. They aren't sensed by dogs. So like you might have works of art that depend on something that is only noticeable or applicable to a particular species. Another example of this, which is not based on DNA, would be like a joke that is based on a particular language. So like we mentioned earlier about aliens writing German and that being kind of ridiculous and not possible. There might be jokes that are about the particularities of the German language. And of course, we would expect that a person who doesn't understand the German language would not understand that joke. And the particularities of the German language are very arbitrary. There will be no reason for distant species to create the same language exactly. So this is specific, arbitrary cultural knowledge. And in this case, language, this type of cultural knowledge is actually very easy to replicate. I can imagine it'd be very easy for an alien to learn German, but it would just not happen that the alien would independently create German. So the specifics of this language are narrow-reaching knowledge, and jokes about the German language would not be understood by a person who doesn't understand German, or would not be understood by an alien who doesn't understand German. And so aliens would not independently create a joke about the German language, and so there would be no overlap for that subject. Whereas if there were jokes based exclusively on necessary wide-reaching knowledge, that would be much more accessible to an alien, and there would be the possibility that an alien and a person would independently create similar jokes. In the most basic, I just want to go real basic sense here, this would be like jokes based on mathematics. I could imagine aliens and humans creating mathematics that are very similar and making jokes about mathematics that would be about similar things. And so that's why I actually think that, something like the rule of thirds seems like it would be, I think an alien could create that type of beauty. I think there could be overlap in that type of structural organization of visual elements on a flat canvas. So that's saying, essentially what I'm saying is that I expect that any civilization that does progress would also create knowledge about geometry, and they would use that knowledge of geometry to inform how they create their works of art. And so there could be overlap in the works of art for an alien civilization and human civilization. If we can take the time to explain our beauty and explain the patterns that are actually being replicated, explain what background knowledge is necessary in the environment of the work of art, and explain the background knowledge that is necessarily in the environment of the mind. If we understand all those things and we can explain our beauty, then we can understand more clearly the reach of the beauty within our work of art. We can understand the reach of our works of art at all. And if we do that, then we can understand which patterns in our work of art could be independently discovered by aliens and which ones could not be independently discovered by aliens. So we can just understand the reach. There's just more clearly understanding the reach of our beauty. This gives us much more clarity on which parts of our works of art are narrow reaching, and specifically meaning what are the necessary limits for how well we can improve the certain beauty or the certain patterns within our works of art. It also gives us insight into understanding if there are certain patterns within our works of art that could be improved without any limits. So, very interesting question, and it gets us to understand the nature of progress a little bit in our works of art. So, what do you think? Do you think that alien civilizations across the universe would converge on beauty? The way I see it, aliens and other intelligent beings will create beauty that replicates in similar environments, meaning they will be able to replicate into our minds, and they will cause similar effects. That to me is very interesting. I'm excited to see it. Let's find those aliens. If you're this far in the video, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for watching. Tell me what you think, and follow my channel for more. I talk about this kind of stuff.